Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. My view count is down. I want to make just an audio video. I'm going to describe a TV show on Apple called Disclaimer and a TV show on Netflix, which is the second season of Squid Games, and how there is this woke manipulative agenda that is just, I would call it abusive to the audience, right? Everybody who puts content out, you have an audience, and your audience is your customer. I don't want to say your boss, but they're in charge of whether you still are going to make content or not, right? They're your critics and they're your, benefactors or whatever it is, right? Like there's all these different things that an audience is. And in terms of a creator, you're telling your audience a story in one way or another. This is a story, right? This is information that you're presenting, whether you're doing it on the news, you're telling the story of what's happening in current events, or you're making just a comedian, right? There's a premise you're developing. You're telling stories, and that becomes a part of the person's internal world, the person receiving your story, right? And so it could be like you're at the water cooler at work, like if such a thing exists anymore, and you're talking with your fellow employees, and you're talking about the boss or the boss's husband or somebody else at work, and you tell a story that makes people change their opinion of that person. Let's say your boss, you see they do something that's illegal, or they chewed you out, or they did something that was unfair, and you're telling the story, and after the people hear the story, they don't like the boss as much. It changes their opinion of the boss or some other fellow employee, right? These stories that you tell are going to affect people's view on any number of things, right? When somebody tells a story about Donald Trump, someone like Chris Christie. Chris Christie comes out and says that Donald Trump had a meeting with him and some other people. And Chris Christie ends up getting COVID because of it. And he later finds out that Trump was the person who had COVID going into the meeting. And so Trump calls him and says, will you, tell people that you didn't get the COVID from me? Like, don't tell the media that you get the COVID from me. And then you find out Donald Trump's been telling everybody that he got COVID from you and that you gave everybody COVID at the meeting. And so, if that actually happened, then it's good information because you know that Donald Trump's a piece of shit and he threw his loyal friend under the bus. This is why Chris Christie turned on him, right? And if you believe it, it's like, well, you just like Donald Trump. You don't believe it, you come up with some reason Chris Christie's a piece of crap or whatever. But the doubt is still there. The seeds are there. It's inside of you, this idea of Trump. And, it may never come to that where you see Trump in a different way, but it's possible. Like the seeds of doubt are there, right? And so when you're telling stories and you're manipulating people in some way or another, purposefully or just in general, because the story isn't true or it's so manipulated in one way or another to evoke certain emotions, right? So there are people that are good at telling stories, and they are doing a disservice to their audience. They're moving their audience in a direction. And the two shows that I'm talking about, I'm going to talk about those things. One's the feminist direction. The other is the LGBTQ woke agenda kind of direction, right? Specifically to do with transgender people. And so I want to get into that in a moment. But I've noticed over the past 3 or 4 videos that my view count is down here. And I'm just so tired of like trying to deal with that. So the Orbs Are Coming was put out on December 23rd, and that had 5,000 views. A couple of videos before that had almost 4,000, 4 videos. And then you use your effing noggin had almost 5,000. And you don't want to be here. You don't want to hear this, but you need to, whatever it is. Had 6,000, and the video before that, more drones and Luigi, 6,000. So, kind of an average of about 5,000. And then the videos since then, they've had the video that's put out on the Christmas Eve had 2,800. The video about Santa Claus and NORAD had 1,900. Christmas message. The two videos were put out on that day, so that second one it wouldn't get as many notifications. And then the next couple of videos had 2,900, 2,800. Day after Christmas, Aaron Rodgers thing. And then the one I just released today, I don't know. So there are a couple of things here. I just want to talk about these briefly. But there's going to be a change in my content until the view count comes back up, because I'm going to work on other things. And, I just feel kind of tired. And, I have a few things to get to. New Year's message, the year of thing, and some of these other things. I'm going to do these prophecies of the whispers of the brighter world that are, to me, as important video as I'll ever make here in terms of talking about those things. If they're true prophecies, if things are going to happen, then, this would be of great value to people. But it isn't great value to the people who do Sashmark meditating, like people in the system, which I'll get into. I was talking about today a little bit in my most recent Journey series video. But anyways, there is some fall off around Christmas because people are doing holiday stuff, right? And they don't have time to watch videos. They're with family, whatever it might be, traveling, whatever it is. I mean, general holidays are bad days for videos. And that's one thing. But the other thing is, like I've said over and over again, the best month of the year is December. November, the end of November to the beginning of December, up until Christmas. And then the ad revenue that YouTube receives, the ad buys, disappears. And, these businesses have a budget and a fiscal year, and the fiscal year ends in something like January 15th, and then they have to reapply their budget. And usually they don't spend as much money on ads in January, February, March, and then a little bit more in April and May, and then a little bit more in the summer, and then it's back into the Christmas season. And if it's a political, if it's a presidential election year, or every 2 years, or when they have the election for the midterms, there's a little bit more because there's a lot more political ads. Of course, there was over $1 billion of ad revenue that was available this summer. I mean, there was like $3 billion. Like Trump had close to $1 billion, and Kamala had $2 billion, and PACs and all these things. So that was a tremendous amount of ad revenue injected into the social media platforms. And I don't know if YouTube's getting less money because they're putting it in other platforms. I don't know if YouTube's paying me less money or running less ads. But I made 4 or 5 times the money I made in 2020. In 2020, I made 4 or 5 times as much money as I made in 2024, right? So it's dim prospects. And so, like, I recognize now it's going to get sucky for me economically. And if they're now withholding my views, because they don't need me anymore, right? They need everybody because they have more ads than they have videos to put them up on, right? So they want content. YouTube wants as much content as possible in December, and they relax on the rules. All of a sudden, they're not, yellowing videos. They're not, they're not forcing community guidelines issues. They loosen up on all these things. And then January comes along, and all of a sudden, they're big on censorship, and they're, all these things because they don't need you anymore. I mean, it's just a slimy business. But in all that, so I don't know what's going on. Right now, there's less views. I don't know if the people aren't getting notified or they're just busy, whatever the reason. And so it is what it is. But I'm just going to make a voiceover video today. Like, I'm just taking some time off. I've been kind of tired, just, not necessarily sick, maybe slightly under the weather, but more, it's just the winter. And, this is the shitty part of the winter. The good part is, like, leading up to Christmas, and, it's new, and it's, it's nice to see snow and things. But here, it's just gray from here on until, like, March. Almost every day is overcast. And it's either, like, close to snowing but not snowing, like a lot of rain, or not even raining, but just complete cloud cover. And just, windy and just crappy outside. So anyway, so that's where I'm at, right? So, but I want to do these voiceover videos that are easier for me to make on some of these days, especially days that, there's going to be less views. Plus, there's no news. when there's a holiday, especially Christmas, the bigger holidays, and Christmas, very seldom does there any real news. All the main news anchors and people go on, vacation or whatever. They have these stand-ins, and nobody's watching the news because they're busy doing family stuff. I mean, viewership goes down across the board, and miraculously, there's no big news, and nobody gives a shit about the news during the holiday season, and then it picks back up or whatever in January. And so let me get into these stories just to put this out there. But of course, again, being shadow banned, liking the videos, commenting, subscribing, resubscribing, the notification button, being a member, or one-time donations, or whatever people do. These are things that are going to keep my channel afloat and keep it relevant. Like, I'm just kind of worn out on the whole thing. And like I had said last year, I was going to take some time in January and rethink what I'm doing, right? And, just in terms of the whole thing with Rumble's a complete bust. Like, it's just nobody's viewing my videos over there. I don't think people are cared. Maybe it's late in the game in terms of making videos to do with recovering from COVID. And, I don't know how Rumble works and how long it would take me to build an audience. But the ad revenue, I mean, I can look at it real quick here. But I'll, talk about that more. I still want to complete those videos, but there's no financial incentive. I made 51 cents on 3 videos total. Like, not on, that's the total amount of money that I've made on Rumble. And so, it's just, I mean, it's not sustainable over there. And it's harder to use. Like, I don't love the format and all of it, right? And it seems like it's, Republican based. Like, I'm looking in the side panel here, like all the videos that are there, and it's all Republican stuff. So, I'm not a right-wing person, and, I'm not a Trumper, and, all of it. But the latest video got 2 comments and has 211 views. And so, all these things. Anyways, so there's that. I have 106 followers. And so, it's just not a solution. And, people want to give me advice and things about it, but I've been through everything. Like, I can look into, but there's issues with the platforms. They're paying less money and they're preventing further growth. I mean, I've said for a long time, it's a losing battle. I'm going to make content, but it's just going to be different. Like, I'm going to change the way I do it if it's, whatever it is. So we'll see how it goes. And so there's all that. But let's get into the stuff here. So the first thing is this TV show called Disclaimer. And it stars Cate Blanchett and Kevin Kline. And the show starts off with, there's 3 storylines. And so there's a young couple, they're having sex in a train. And they're traveling, they're English, and they're traveling to Italy. You find out they're going to Italy. And then it shows Cate Blanchett, she's married to Sacha Baron Cohen, who plays her, it's like kind of serious, dopey husband. And it's really weird. He's weird, like just weird, and that's kind of a weird choice. And Kevin Kline, who's an old professor who's about to get fired for being like, there's a mom in the principal's office, and he's just over it. Like, you can hear his internal dialogue, right? And he's talking about how these kids, he just can't stand them anymore, these entitled prep school kids. And the mom's very upset about the critique he did on the kids' writing, and he refuses to apologize. And so he's about to get fired. And you know that these stories are interwoven. And so the story in Italy, they do a specific wipe. They do this circle wipe like you see in Italian movies, often used in those. I haven't seen that many Italian movies, but I know they use that wipe. And the rest of them are set in, England, and it's a little bit, it's almost like a different camera style and things like this. And so the movie is told from 3 points of view, which is hard to understand, right? So sometimes Kevin Kline is narrating, right? Sometimes Cate Blanchett is narrating, and then there's sometimes just the scenes. but there's a lot of voiceover. And so it's hard to understand where the point of view is coming from, right? Which is purposefully done. And it's kind of interesting in the beginning, but the ending is so bad and so manipulative. It wrecks all the quality acting. It's a high, it's a high value. These Apple shows have high production values, but oftentimes they come with such a fucking agenda. It's just really bad. And so, there's a point of view when you learn about, and again, this is going back to the story, right? The story is there for the audience. And your internal world is built on stories. Your personal stories, your experiences, and the stories that we have now. It used to be campfires and fables and these types of things, that are told, parables or whatever they are, religious stories and stories that are passed down to, fairy tales and things like this. Word of mouth stories, storytelling tradition in Native American cultures and other tribal cultures. And it's how you understand the world around you is your stories. And you think in story form. People think about their life as a story, and then because you tell stories, like on social media, right? There's a good bit done by the comedian Chris Porter. There's like he's got this great kind of. I've quoted from this thing before. He's got a great comedy set that was on Netflix for a while. Now it's on YouTube, and he said he was on social media, and one of his friends was talking about describing how he's cleaning out his refrigerator, right? And he's like, it's a story about nothing, but it's still a story. And the joke was, if somebody asks you, what do you do this weekend? And the answer is, I cleaned out my refrigerator. The real answer is nothing, right? The answer that you give to the person is nothing because it's not worth saying, right? There's another comedic bit done by Brian Regan in a recent, his gray-haired special. It's like maybe one or two specials ago. And he describes going to this party. And this guy describes, he's sitting in a circle of people talking. And one of these guys describes in a Boston accent buying 5 different lottery tickets. And, the whole thing's kind of hilarious. But the guy goes into detail about buying 5 lottery tickets. And then the punchline of the joke is, so it comes to the end and the guy, he doesn't win. And Brian Regan says, this was amazing. You took a story about nothing and then you made it less, right? And so, if you're telling a story about buying lottery tickets, there should be like winning something, right? Or some kind of thing that happens. A story gets robbed or something, right? But, stories, it's still stories, right? It's all story form. Everything you see on social media, when you interact with people, how was your day? And they tell you about the story. And so, you communicate in story form, and story form is how people build their internal worlds and how they view other people and other things. And so it's manipulative, if you tell a deceptive story to move people in a political or social agenda, which is so prevalent now with this woke bullshit culture thing and the Hollywood morality, right? So the story begins for Kate Blanchett. She gets a copy of a book, and it's clearly about her. And she flips out because it paints her in a bad light. She says to her husband what a bad person she is, and she's starting to freak out that this story is told. And the book said it's dedicated to somebody, and it's the boy who's in this relationship in Italy. It says the stories of these characters are fictional, but where it usually would say, in anything that relates to real life events is completely unintentional, right? Like as a disclaimer. But in this one, it says it's intentional. Like so. It's clearly about her, and they wants her to know that it's about her, right? And she's won an award because she's a documentarian and about somebody who has all this credit. She's very rich. Her husband works as a lawyer who is in charge of rich people's money, putting it in foundations to basically money launder it and keep from paying taxes on it. So he's a scumbag lawyer, and she is a documentarian. And she has a good reputation. Like she's won awards and things. And this story is something she hasn't thought about in years but doesn't want to know about. And so the story, as you figure out how it relates to each other, it's their kid who's on vacation Kevin Kline and his wife's kid. His wife is dead, but Kevin Kline's son, who was on vacation, he's going to die, and this woman's a part of it, right? As the story evolves, and so Kevin Kline's wife, when her son died, he he goes and this is totally spoiler alert. I'm telling you everything here, but whatever. I should have said that earlier. I'll put spoiler alert in the title. And so Kevin Kline's wife flipped out after her son died. And she got cancer and died herself. She quit her job and she went to live in her son's room. Like she just withdrew and she wouldn't leave her son's room. And she just withdrew into this, situation. And Kevin Kline wouldn't go into the room with her. She was dying of cancer and the room smelled and just as the story evolves. And he's, narrating this again. When you think about, first person, when somebody's telling a story as a point of view, like when you took classes about this in high school or college or whatever, I am Ishmael, is the first line. Is it the first line? Something like that from Moby Dick. And, you're listening to Ishmael's story about he's a sole survivor of the time Moby Dick takes down the Pequod, right? He destroys the boat, the great white whale, right? So, but you're listening to Ishmael's story, first person. So you have these different things, and you have these walls, and like the fourth wall, like in Deadpool, where they break the fourth wall and talk directly to the audience, acknowledging this is just a story in a film or whatever. And even that, it's all these things are a point of view. So Kevin Kline's talking about his story. And his story is that his wife died and never recovered from her son's death. And so he goes into his wife's room and he's giving away his wife's clothes. So she has just recently died. And he's, people are coming in to take all of her belongings, her clothes and things. And he keeps one sweater of hers, which he wears from time to time. And the rest of it, he goes into a room. And he discovers a pocket knife. It's his son's room, right? His dead son's room. And he discovers a pocket knife. And there's pictures of Kylie Minogue all over the place, like posters, this Australian singer. And he discovers his son pocket knife. And behind it is a manuscript, which you see as the book that Kate Blanchett now has, right? And Kate Blanchett finds out that her son has read it. And she has, obviously a difficult relationship with her son. Her son looks like a real loser. And she's grilling him. He's getting irritated why he liked the book. And he says because the woman was bad and she dies in the end. That she gets punished because she sucks as a person, right? And so the character that's based in her, he reads about, and when he reads it, he wishes she was dead. And Kate Blanchett is hysterical going, and her husband's trying to calm her down and all these things. And his husband says the book isn't about you. But the book was a package that was delivered to her, and her son got a book. He works at some sort of a Blockbuster retail store. He sells vacuum cleaners. And some customer left him a book there with his name on it. He went home and he read it, even though he's an internet person. Somehow he read the book. And he hasn't read books in years, and now he has this story of his mom, right? And Kevin Kline is, narrating his, discovering the manuscript, and he self-publishes it, and he enacts this plan. He's now retired, and his wife is dead, and his son is dead, and he blames this woman for it, and he's going to destroy her life. And so he goes through these various, aspects of the plan, right? And he also discovers these pictures, which is of a younger version of Kate Blanchett, and she's doing sexual things, like she's posing like she's in, Penthouse or Playboy or something, and she's, posing seductively and sexually, and these pictures were taken by his son, because his son was given a high-quality camera, and you already saw his son taking pictures and selfies of him and his girlfriend, in Italy. So you know that the pictures come from his son. So they published his son's photos, and he obviously had an affair with Kate Blanchett. And when she was younger, it's 20 years ago when his son died. So the stories are going back in time over, the time period, right? And it's hard to understand where the point of view of each story is coming from because, Kate Blanchett's story is coming from her. She's narrating her story, and she's a storyteller because she does documentary and stuff. And Kevin Kline is like an English teacher. So his wife has written this book and his story and her story of this thing. And they keep on going back to this time in Italy, and his son's girlfriend has to go back because her mother has died, right? Her mother's sister, her aunt, has died, and she leaves him. And she says basically, go ahead and be with other women. I'm going to shag somebody back in England. And so like their relationship is kind of over. He's left alone, and so then he sees Kate Blanchett on the beach, and there's a silhouette. She's sort of silhouetted with a see-through dress and a bikini, and she's playing with her son, and he's taking pictures of her without her permission, and she flirts with him, and her husband has gone back to England, right? So it shows Kevin Kline buying a vacuum and manipulating this kid and talking about how this kid is so easily a pawn in what his game of destroying his mom's life, right? Because he wants revenge for his son's death, right? And then he sends the naked pictures to Kate Blanchett's husband, Sacha Baron Cohen, and he flips out because she's so sexual in the pictures in a way that she was never with him. And he recognizes the hotel room. He knows what's happened. That some guy took pictures of her, naked pictures, sexual pictures of her. And, it's very graphic. The stuff's, the whole, like, part of the storyline is very graphic, right? Unnecessarily so. Like, it's just when it gets to the end of the thing. And he starts realizing that, she was sexual with this person more than with him. And they weren't having sex when he was there in Italy. Like, they were sexual life wasn't great. And that he doesn't recognize her expressions in this part, right? And so it flips out, makes him insecure, and then he just realizes this was all going on with his son there in the hotel room. In the hotel, they have a suite because they're rich, but the son's a part of this. That there's an affair going on, and her 4-year-old son is a part of it, right? And that the kid is a complete mess. The kid ends up being like he does heroin. He's completely lost. And Kate Blanchett has just kicked him out of the house. He's 25 years old. He was 4 years old when the affair took place. And Sacha Baron Cohen didn't want the kid to get kicked out of the house, but he agreed with it. But now he's like pissed that she's done this because she's been a horrible mother, neglectful to her son, like he's aware of this. And he keeps on apologizing for her or excusing her behavior when she keeps on saying she's a shit mom, right? All these things. And so the kid's just a mess. And so Kevin Kline goes in and thinks that, he's going to manipulate this kid. He goes to his work, and he keeps on pretending he's throwing grenades after they show him dropping off the book. They go back in time and show him dropping off the book to Kate Blanchett's kid, right? And so Kevin Kline, then everyone in this movie is a piece of shit. Like, they're just unlikable, self-centered. There's no redeeming qualities or good people. There's no one there's no protagonist. You're kind of rooting for Kate Blanchett to get punished because, she deserves it. But Kevin Kline's just a horrible person, manipulative and just evil. And then he goes to her place of work, and she had just yelled at her assistant. Well, one of the things, we'll go back to that later. And her assistant knows because she's looked up Kevin Kline, which Kate Blanchett had figured out that this husband was still alive. And she had met with the mom one time, like in a diner, and the mom had no hair. She was, she's losing all her hair because of cancer, and the mom sets in on Kate Blanchett, says she wants to see her son because it turns out that her son saved his son's life and drowned in the process, right? And that story's going to develop later on. But like, you're getting hints of these things as they go through this sort of mystery and all these things. And it's good story construction, but then they just fucking, because of this new, feminist agenda, they just blow it up at the end, right? So Kate Blanchett figures out that the mom who she met and said her husband was dead, but he was alive, that the husband's alive, and he's the one that's doing this to her, right? And like she goes into a bookstore, her favorite bookstore, and she sees the book. And the woman pushes the book, and she knows the woman. Like it's one of these kind of fancy bookstores, English bookstores. And the woman says to her, "You got to read this book. It's got the woman, the villain, and the woman. It's a horrible person, right?" Which is Kate Blanchett, and she's coming apart. And her husband confronts her with the naked pictures, and he leaves her, and he's clearly not believing her story. And he's going to read the book now, and he's reading the book, finding out about what happened, right? And like he's flipping out, and so she doesn't go to work, and Kevin Kline goes to her job and meets her assistant. And when she starts researching, the assistant starts researching Kevin Kline and says that he worked with kids, Kate Blanchett writes down pedophile as a way to smear this guy, to destroy him before he destroys her. So she's, manipulative and, a liar, and just she's willing to smear this guy who's lost his son and that she is in some way responsible for. And so they're painting her as this manipulative, horrible person. And so when Kevin Kline meets with the assistant who's been yelled at, because she asked Kate Blanchett if she got all this more information about the guy, and Kate Blanchett said, "Just drop it." And she says it, and she snaps at her. So the girl's pissed at her, and she obviously doesn't like working for Kate Blanchett because she's kind of bitchy. And so the Kevin Kline says that he's being harassed by Kate Blanchett, which really isn't happening, and that she's threatening him because he's written this book, and he hands that book to the girl, and he brings a bag full of books so all the coworkers can read them. And these all people are truth-seeking documentarians, and they all read the book, and then Kate Blanchett comes into work, and they're all looking at her like she's the devil. And then she flips out, and she slaps a guy that she was is her contemporary in this business, whatever it is, right? And it's very new age and whatever. And so she, this guy she was mocking before, she was treating him like she was trying to make him jealous. She was pretending one of her documentaries was going to be turned into an American film. And her assistant said, "Was it?" And she goes, "No, I was just provoking him, right?" But now he's confronting her because they're like partners. And he grabs her arm, and she's walking out, and she slaps him. And all these kids, all these people who work there are recording it, and it's immediately up on Twitter. And she's on a bus. Some of the things are stupid because her husband and her are both taking public transportation, and they clearly can afford cabs. And we're going through these kind of crises. There's a woman sleeping on her, and they're on these buses, and with people they usually don't interact with, and they're going through these crises, which is just totally unnecessary. Wouldn't happen. Like, so you start seeing flaws in the way that they're constructing the narrative to, sometimes when they're building a premise for something later on, like a comedian is building a premise for a joke, the premise has to hold up. And the story starts falling apart because where you're going with it, you have to do things that wouldn't happen in reality, right? And Kevin Kline, when he, drops this information at Kate Blanchett's work, he walks out of the building, and he acts like a real feeble old man, but then he'll stand up, and he pretends he threw just another grenade, like it's his thing he does, right? He pulls the pin and he throws a grenade, and all these things are blowing up her life and her reputation, and now she's all over social media, slapping her co-worker, and she gets this message, and it's from Human Services, on her body. It was just kind of a funny thing, right? And so then it goes back to the back in time when Kevin Kline and his wife are barbecuing, and the cops show up and say that her son is dead, and that they need to go claim the body in Italy. This is like the third episode, and so his wife's losing it. So they go to Italy to identify the body, and she loses it, and she goes on this investigative, she's trying to find out every detail she can, which is going to turn into this book, which she's going to use later on. Her husband's going to use to ruin Kate Blanchett's life. And then they show this younger version of Kate Blanchett seducing this kid. And it's like there's a grooming scene. He ends up taking pictures of her on the beach, in an earlier episode. And then in this one, she leaves her son in. Her son's 4 years old, and she leaves him in this hotel room by himself. She goes down to a bar, and she, is having drinks with him, right? This guy, and she asks him about if he'd ever cheated on his girlfriend and like what celebrity crush he has, and he says Kylie Minogue. He has these paint pictures you'll see later on the wall of his bedroom, like this that they'll develop later on. And she says, "Well, what do you like about Kylie?" And then she goes through this very graphic grooming phase where this kid's like 18, 19, 20, something like that, right? Probably 19 or 20. And he's all nervous and stuttering, and she's making him describe what he would do sexually to Kylie Minogue, and he's getting all aroused. And then she leaves her key there with him. And like, we had to fast forward. It was so uncomfortable. Like, it was going on forever. This description, right? Very graphic description, which is in the book, which we'll get into in a bit. And then he comes up to her hotel room, and then they have this long, very, where she's in control of this whole like sex scene, and we've had to fast forward through that. The whole thing's very greasy and unnecessarily long. But between those phases, between these episodes, it's told in part, and it keeps on flashing over to the story of the mom finding out about her son's death. And she finds the pocket knife, and she finds the roll of film, all these things that are going to play later. And Kevin Kline sees the pocket knife, and he points out that she didn't want her son to have a pocket knife. And again, he's traveling across Europe in 2000s, which would be, the 2000s, right? And, he doesn't have a cell phone or anything like this. He's sending postcards. And it seems like it's earlier period, but it's clearly 2000s because, they're in 2024, so it's like 2004, right? Her son is now 24 or 25, so it's been 21 years. Kate Blanchett's son is now 25. And, they point out the pocket knife. It's been brought to attention, right? So there's this element. And so the story moves on where he goes and he catfishes the son. He makes, Kevin Kline gets someone to help him make an Instagram page of his son. And he ends up catfishing Kate Blanchett's son. They're Instagram friends, and Kate Blanchett's son's such a loser, and he's so grumpy and just like irritating, and his parents are overachievers, and he's living in a gross apartment, he's got a shitty job, and he's like totally low energy and just like pathetic. I mean, everyone's unlikable. And they show how her son drowns. And what happens is Kate Blanchett and this kid go have sex in one of the changing bathroom kind of things on the beach, right? One of the bathrooms on the beach. And she leaves her son alone, comes back and takes a nap. And she bought her son a inflatable boat, which the kid brings out into the ocean. And she wakes up and he's in the middle of the ocean. And her lover, the boy who's Kevin Kline's son, runs out and swims out there. And he pulls the kid back far enough to where lifeguards can come out and other people can save the kid, but then he's out there and he drowns. And the mom can't believe it because he was such a strong swimmer. Can't believe he drowned. Plus there's like an X, it's a cut on his arm, when they see his dead body, and there's an X there, right? And she doesn't think he drowned, and there's some suspicion there, and this weird cut that he has on his arm, right? And so Kevin Kline's catfishing this kid who's been using heroin now, and his dad has kicked Kate Blanchett out of the Sacha Baron Cohen's kicked Kate Blanchett out of their house, and the kid's moved back in, and the kid hates his dad too, but he likes his dad more than he likes his mom. And the kid, there's some thoughts that Kate Blanchett is verbalizing for the kid about the dad, right? And he really hates his mom, but he doesn't really like his dad, but he can use him or whatever. And this Kevin Kline posing as his dead son, and he's catfishing the kid, and he references the book because they both read the book, and he sends the naked photos of his mom, and said that your mom made a choice between, her lover and almost let you drown, and this kid drowned. saving you. And like he says, this is a fake Facebook, Instagram page, and this is the kid that saved your life, and your mom didn't love you enough to swim out there herself, right? She was watching. She went in waist deep, and when she saw her son in the middle of the ocean, but she didn't dive in to swim out and try to save him, right? And that she's selfish, and this is all in the book where all these people are reading now, her coworkers and her husband and her son, and her son realizes this book's about her, and he flips out, and he goes to do some heroin, and he ends up having a stroke. And Kevin Kline meets with Sacha Baron Cohen, and Sacha Baron Cohen is thanking him for sending him the pictures. Like, he doesn't know his son has gotten the pictures from the guy as well, and his son's flipping out. And so she goes to the hospital, and Sacha Baron Cohen calls Kevin Kline up and says his son's in the hospital. And Kevin Kline had said to him his wife just wanted to meet the boy that her son had died for, right, to save him. Like, she just wanted to meet him, and Kate Blanchett wouldn't let it happen. So Kevin Kline goes to look at this kid who is, that Sacha Baron Cohen said you can see him in the hospital. And he's hooked up to tubes, and he's been sedated, and he's had a stroke. And Kevin Kline takes some Drano, and is going to inject it into the kid's, his body to kill the kid, so his mom will suffer the same loss that he did. But she's a shit mom who doesn't really care about her kid, and it comes out over and over again how she neglected him. And the kid talks about it with Kevin Kline about, and when he's catfishing him, they're talking about how their moms suck, and he said his mom used to, abandon him like when he was a kid and go do jobs and then come back and spend time with him, but it was just fake and not real and not whatever. But Kate Blanchett catches Kevin Kline in the hospital with her son, and she pushes him down on the floor. The nurses all come to his aid, and they escort her out. She's hysterical. So Kevin Kline's sleeping, and he's all happy with how everything's gone and how everything's fallen apart for her. And he was given some drugs, some sedatives to help him sleep for the, which made no sense, but he asked for them. And then he wakes up, and he hears his window, his door's been broken. Like, he has a glass door, and he comes out, and the glass has been shattered, and somebody's broken into his house, and he goes in the kitchen with a cricket bat, and Kate Blanchett's in the backyard holding a knife. And he, sees her, and she says, "This is where you were when you found out about your son dying." And then she comes in, and she's like ordering him around, and he says, "Well, let me make some tea first." And there's always like tea, like when the cops come to tell the woman her son's died, she's like, "I'm gonna go make some tea." And the cops in Kevin Kline and his wife's kitchen, and she just makes some tea. Like, tea is like their solution for everything. Well, let's have a cup of tea, like whatever it is. So Kevin Kline makes some tea, and he's crushing up these sedatives, and Kate Blanchett doesn't notice it. And then she starts telling her side of the story, right? And there had been a reference where, like that they went back to a conversation that Kevin Kline's wife's had with the mother of his girlfriend. And Kevin Kline said, not all of this story is true. And my wife had said to me, is this story that we're seeing a part of this book? And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense, because what mom would write such graphic, sexual, explicit grooming scene and sexual explicit behaviors, that was so gross we had to fast forward through. It's so uncomfortable. And the mom is writing this about her son and Kate Blanchett. So I'm like, well, no, this must be what really happened, because no mom would write that. Like, it's silly. Mom would make a book that is filled with very sexual behavior that her son is engaged in, right? Where she wouldn't really have knowledge of any of that. She would have knowledge of some of the other things, how he died, and, the knowledge he got from the police when she went to Italy, but not the knowledge from all these other, events, right? And she's talking to the mom, and the story that she manipulated, that the girl who was dating her son, and she said that in the story, the book, she said that the girl's aunt had died, but in reality, they had a bad fight. And it sounds like he did something really bad to her over the phone, because the mother's arguing with the other mother, right? And then later on, she calls up the mother when she gets back from Italy and says her son's dead. And the woman's like, so what? Like, so, and she slams down the phone because, like, it's this thing. And Kevin Kline had said when he found out that his boy had swam out to save the kid, his kid was selfish and he had never done anything for anybody else. So those are the only references that he has. And his wife's a nightmare, right? She says, I'm moving into my son's room. And he goes, can we talk about this? And she says, no. And she won't let him come into the room. He's just bringing her food, and she's leaving plates out there for him to clean. And she's quit her job, and she's dying of cancer, and she's just, all these things. She just falls apart. And she's kind of selfish and really, she's one of these stiff English, these women who are, just kind of spinstery. And so the idea that she would write these graphic, imaginative, sexual encounters that her son had with this woman it just wouldn't happen. It's weird. Like, what mom would write that, right? So that's all weird, right? So that, now the story's kind of falling apart. And so Kate Blanchett tells her story, and she says, your wife got some things right. I did fall asleep on the beach because I had such a bad night the night before. And when I woke up, my son was in the middle of the ocean, and I couldn't swim out to save him. And when your son was drowning and I saw him drowned, I didn't tell anybody because I wanted him to die. Right? So she admits to neglecting her child and then not willing to risk her own life to save him. And what a shit mom she was. She goes like, that's all true. Which makes her a horrible person, right? And the fact that she does admit that she went down to a bar. She said she had a wonderful day with her kid. And she saw this kid taking pictures of her. And she liked it, but she didn't have consensual sex with him. So her story is the kid comes up and she left the keys in the door. She was in the bar and the kid was in the bar flirting with her, but they didn't interact. He followed her upstairs. She left the keys in the door. He comes and rapes her at knife point. And it's very graphic what she's saying. And the kid wakes up, her kid wakes up and he goes in there and threatens the kid with a knife. The kid doesn't know it, but he's willing to kill the kid, he's saying to her, if she doesn't obey him. And he forces her to take all these seductive pictures. But some of the seductive pictures were on the beach. And she says that her son threw sand on her and she was taking the sand out, like of her top and her, whatever, her bottom. Instead, she wasn't doing sexual things. The kid was taking pictures without her knowledge. And it just doesn't, it's not like it's goofy, right? Like they're now just they've manipulated their audience to paint Kate Blanchett as a piece of shit and a horrible person. And all the evidence is supporting this. But now they're turning this around and making this kid a rapist with very flimsy story points, right? Like some kind of surprise ending. And Kate Blanchett's all, emotional. She's telling this story about how the kid, like, graphically raped her all night, right? And the kid's in complete control, like he's done this before. And that he's a 19-year-old kid. It's silly. Like, everything that you know about this doesn't make sense the way that they've painted this story. And she hates her son. Like, it's clear that she wants her son. Like, she doesn't like him, doesn't respect him, wants to get rid of him. And when she was talking to the kid's mom, and the mom said, my son died saving your son. And she said, I wish he hadn't. So she's basically saying that she wished she hadn't saved her son. And her son's on drugs and falling apart and just has no life, no friends. He's a complete loser. And she wants nothing to do with him, kicks him out of the house. And then all of a sudden she's all about her son, right? And, this is how, like, this thing's ending. And she tells a story about how her son had they have a suite, the hotel room suite. And her son has his own room. And he's okay sleeping by himself as long as the door's open. Now, this is a 4-year-old kid, right? And she leaves him in the hotel room in a foreign country, and she goes down to this bar and starts drinking till late in the night. And she's just sitting there by herself drinking, talking about how happy she is and how this is like the best day of her life. And yet she had to leave her son alone. And then she comes back up to the apartment, where the guy comes in with a knife and starts, manhandling her, making her pose. And her story, and again, this is graphic and hard to watch. but it's intertwined with her telling the story to Kevin Kline. So it's like one of these things. And she's telling the story where she says that, she was pretending to like what was going on. And the kid wanted her, like the kid's going back and forth between getting off on forcing her to do stuff to where that he's also getting off on her liking it. Like these things don't make sense, right? Because rape is an act of violence and all these things against women. There's no reference point like he had a good relationship with his mom. There's nothing here in this kid's storyline that makes sense. Like maybe the kid's a piece of shit. He's not he's selfish. But for a kid to just come in and do all these things. And then Kevin Kline says, I don't believe your story. And she goes, what, you want forensic evidence? Well, I took his DNA and I stored it in my face cream. And I also took pictures of my bruises and things, right? And that, but I didn't want to go to the cops because I didn't want to involve my son. I didn't want my husband to find out. I just wanted the whole thing to go away. So she goes to sleep for a brief period of time. The kid's, he's raping her all night. And then she wakes up. Her son's waking her up and he's bugging her to go to the beach. She goes, well, I knew I was tired, but I didn't know what to do. So she goes to the beach where her rapist is also sitting on the beach the day after. Like this is the story they're trying to, the manipulative filmmakers are trying to sell you after taking you in the complete other direction the whole time, where you dislike Kate Blanchett. But, even if this story was true, she's still a horrible mom who buys her kid an inflatable boat, then goes to sleep. And she could have hired somebody to, watch. She's got money to hire somebody to watch the kid, right? While she's sleeping. But she brings him out of the beach, and the kid goes out in the middle of the ocean, and she watches her rapist, who now all of a sudden is a hero, who goes and swims out in this wavy, storm. And she wakes up because the wind is hitting her with the sand. You know how it gets by the beach when the windstorms come up, and the waves get really, choppy. And this kid's out, a couple 100 feet from shore, and her rapist goes out and swims and saves him for no apparent reason, right? And she watches him drown, wishing he was drowned because of what he did to her. But she took time to save all the DNA and took pictures of herself with, she doesn't have a camera, right? But she took pictures of herself and the bruises and these things, which aren't evident because she's wearing a bikini and you can't see them, right? And so the story is completely unbelievable, but that becomes the real story, her story. And the one that his mom made up with this great graphic sex that no mom would ever write. And this is the worst constructed movie ever, right? Because it was well done at first, and they were convincing you of a certain narrative. And so then Kevin Kline, the sleeping pills kick in, and Kevin Kline says, you're going to go to sleep, and I'm going to go kill your son. And he goes off. He's got his, he's going to inject him with this Drano. He's going to put it into these tubes. The kid's on a respirator. But he gets to the hospital, and the kid's woken up a couple times. And the kid says, Mom, Mom. And he reaches out. And when he woke up before, his dad was in the hospital. His dad grabbed his hand. He doesn't want anything to do with his dad. Even though this kid just found out that his mom had abandoned him and almost let him drown, and that some kid gave his life for him. And his, all the other things he read about his mom in the book. All of a sudden, he's calling out for his mom. And, he holds Kevin Kline's hand, and Kevin Kline realizes that his son is the rapist and who this woman's telling the truth. And he turns around, she shows up, or Sacha Baron Cohen shows up. And he tells Sacha Baron Cohen, you don't see it, but he tells him the story, and he says, the stuff about how he made a mistake, right? And then the wife shows up, and the kid is all loving with his mom, and she's loving with his, with her kid all of a sudden. Like this miraculous exchange, even though she's been selfish and she's been a workaholic and she doesn't like her kid or respect him. And Sacha Baron Cohen comes up to the guy again who's going in the elevator, Kevin Kline, said, why didn't you question your wife beforehand, right? Why did you believe the story? Because he goes, my kid was just evil. Like I realized my kid was evil, and I bought it to my wife's illusion. And he said, why didn't you question it? And now all these provocative pictures are explained away through this story that makes no sense, right? Because he took provocative pictures of her without her permission on the beach, but also by knife point, and that she went along with these things. But Kevin Kline, Sacha Baron Cohen had seen a different side of her, right? And all these things. And she had never told him this stuff. So Sacha Baron Cohen says that, why didn't you question your wife? He goes, well, why didn't you question the story? That was your wife you lived with so many years. Why didn't you question it? And this is the moment where it's like men and white men are pieces of shit, and women are all victims and rape. You know, the woman is always right, and she's the victim, and these men are horrible, and they've misjudged her and ruined her life. So Sacha Baron Cohen apologized to his wife, but she still fell asleep on the beach. She went out drinking and left her son alone in the hotel room, and then she didn't swim out to save him. She didn't risk her own life to save her kid, and she put him in all kinds of danger and made bad decisions that didn't add up. Like I said, the whole thing's silly. Like she was able to get her ducks in a row to make sure she got all the evidence in case she went to the police because she was raped by this kid, right? But then she didn't, you know, make a better decision about going to a beach when she's exhausted from a night where she's been abused all night and falls asleep on a beach where a kid, you can't leave a 4-year-old kid alone unsupervised on a fucking beach. I mean, anybody would know that, or in a hotel room, right? And Sacha Baron Cohen is apologizing to her, but she fucking put her kid in, and she was flirting with this guy too at the bar. And despite her story, she said that she was flirting with him, and she was out drinking, and then all these things, being a horrible mom, and then she didn't tell him for 20 years, and he finds out about this book, and he gets these pictures, and he had every right to believe the story that was told because same reason the audience did. But the filmmaker saying to the audience, "Oh, you guys are all horrible piece of shits because you believe this slanderous story we told about a woman." But when obviously the women are always victims and men are always in the wrong. Because I said to my wife, like halfway through the TV show, I was like, this thing could be called Bitches Be Crazy, right? Because the two women who were focused were crazy, and they were both bad moms and both bad wives. But anyway, Sacha Baron Cohen says, "Can you forgive me?" And she goes, "No, I can't." Because it's better for you that I was raped, like you're happy with me now, than it was that I had an affair. And so I could never forgive that. And she, they have a divorce, and she now lives in the house with her son, and she's just trying to be super mom, and her son and her now have a healed relationship. When she totally would have allowed him to die, and said to this woman, "I wish that kid hadn't said." He would have rather had her son die than have the rapist save her. And why would a rapist, this kid who his father said never did anything for anybody else, go risk his life for the kid, right? Like it's just silly. Like it goes from being, torturing her one night and her sitting on the beach. When a woman's been abused, she doesn't want to see her abuser. Like especially when the guy threatened her kid, and he was threatening her kid. He threatened to kill her kid the night before, and then he saves the kid's life and dies in the process, right? Like the whole thing is just so manipulative to push this fucking feminist agenda that all men are bad and all women are victims. And, and they suck you into, like they're sucking you into, illusion they purposely create. And then they're trying to make the audience feel bad for judging this woman when she had been, a victim, even though she was still a horrible person who was willing to accuse this old man who's lost his son of being a pedophile because he's, published this book based on, his wife's perception. She doesn't know it was written by his wife at the time. And that she's a manipulative person as a documentarian who treats her coworkers and, undermines her partner and makes him feel bad about himself and how much better she's doing than him. And she abuses these people at work and all the rest of it. Like she's a horrible person. And yet, she was victimized, and so she gets to get away with all this stuff. It's just so icky. Like so manipulative, right? Which brings us to the Squid Game Season 2. Okay, so I want to add one more thing here before I go to Squid Games. And so when the editor and the director and the writer and then, the rest of the crew, the actors and the rest of the crew, when they produce a film or TV show, everything that you know about the characters, unless it's some sort of a book or some, it's a repetitive character from other, genres like some Indiana Jones or, some Star Wars with the whole universe, Marvel, comic books, things like this, right? But in terms of this movie, it played like a book with two different narrators and point of view, three different narrators and point of view. And everything that you know about the characters, and they might remind you about of someone in your life. You might see them differently than somebody else would see them, right? All these types of things. But just the objective truth of what these two characters that were involved in this conflict, the boy and the boy who died saving the kid, and the Kate Blanchett characters, everything you knew is there in the what they showed you. And if you were going to believe one of two scenarios based on what you saw of the characters, because the way the boy character was introduced, the whole three or four first episodes, three or four or five episodes, he was a naive, normal kid. And what you were watching was his mom's interpretation of his trip, where she only had postcards and then the details she got from the police about his death, and seeing the environment and all the things that were there for her to see, and the pictures she received from the kid's camera, and interpreting all these events based in that, right? But they don't tell you that. They don't tell you that this is from her book. Like, you get this story, like there's whatever is going on in the book, but they're not reading the book to you. They're just showing you the events as they unfolded. And so you don't know if it's coming from the book. It's not stated any way that you're getting the mom's version of what happened, right? And so you're not introduced to Kate Blanchett's side of the story till the last episode. So episode number 7, right? And so other than his dad saying briefly, the kid didn't care about anybody else, which is, very typical for teenage, young people. He didn't do anything for anybody else. So, and him having, maybe a little bit of a difficult relationship with his dad, and maybe he's a little bit closer to his mom. That doesn't really anything. And that he was possibly accused of something by his former girlfriend, and you aren't sure what that is. The mom knows, but she doesn't tell the dad. And so it's possible that something bad happened physically, or it could have been an argument about something else. They're not clear on that. But everything you've seen about this kid is he's a normal kid. He doesn't look like he's a sexual predator or rapist or anything like this. There's no evidence of any of that other than these few details that slip in sort of, very subtly into this story. Whereas Kate Blanchett is shown over and over again. You hear her thoughts. You hear her thoughts about her husband, that you would totally believe that she would have an affair. Much more so than you believe the kid's a rapist, right? They haven't built the premise. They haven't built the profile of the kid, and they've built her profile to show that she's a liar, deceptive. She's a horrible mom, neglectful, very self-centered. She's a bad wife. She's a bad boss, and she's, dishonest, and somebody who, talks about her husband in a way that he's, clearly not. She was a few years older than him, and she, they get into these details about her husband and how her husband feels cucked by this guy because, he not only his wife was a different way sexually based on the pictures and his understanding of the story, and was said in the book that he read, because again, she never provided him with a different narrative of story. She withheld this story and kept it secret from him, which immediately would make you think it's an affair, right? And she withheld this detail that she fell asleep on the beach with a 4-year-old kid. I mean, first she went out, left the kid sleeping alone in a hotel with a balcony, right? Like a 4-year-old kid is not, you can't leave them alone. You just can't. It's not like that. Not by an ocean. You can't just let your kids swim out in the ocean by themselves, right? You just can't do that. So, it's much more believable that she had an affair. And they don't care about that. They don't care about what they've shown you, what kind of case they've made for the two different interpretations, which one you're going to believe. They just say her side is the right one. She's now the victim, and everybody who wronged her is an issue and a problem. And because she got raped, she can pull the victim card out, and everybody's supposed to believe her, right? It's just everything that was bad about the Me Too movement, everything that was wrong about it, and then all the rest of it. Not that, there isn't real abuse and things weren't, in some cases were there and true or whatever, but we don't know. Like, if we hear two sides of the story, there's a he said, she said, we're going to make our own decisions about it, right? And as moviegoers or TV show watchers, that's what we would do. But they just announce reality, and they imply you're a bad person for believing anything else, even though this other, there was never anything on the table that you would even consider, other than the fact that there was a warning in the beginning of the movie about sexual violence, and there wasn't any up to the point where they showed you the rape scenes, right? Whatever it was, the abuse scenes, and so it was completely not there. So unless the warning was the only thing that was a clue that something bad was going to happen. There was another movie. It was about the French Knights. It starred Matt Damon and a guy Ben Solo, whatever his name is, and a female actress who I don't know who she was. And there were three sides of the story. And the Ben Solo character, he believed that he had consensual sex with Matt Damon's wife, and Matt Damon's wife, they showed her side of the story. And she thought she was raped. I mean, she categorized it as a rape, and they showed the two scenes, the different perspectives, and then Matt Damon's, who wasn't there, but he was eventually challenged this guy to a duel, and whoever won was the true story. Like whoever won the duel, he was dueling on behalf of his wife. But it was done in a much better way. It wasn't a great movie, but at least gave different perspectives of what the different people thought had happened from their point of view. But this piece of shit Apple show, disclaimer, they just announced to you what reality is without, any way that you would believe them, right? It's not believable. Like you haven't make a believable case for what you just showed just because you took all these shortcuts and jumped around and used tricks and manipulation and this, sort of feminist consciousness to force an ending that you didn't make a case for, right? And, that's just disrespectful to the audience. All right, let's move on to the Squid Games. So I saw Squid Game season 1. Like, it was kind of interesting. I liked the cultural differences. It's really weird, kind of a twisted thing, right? An odd, whatever. It's kind of like the Purge type of, it's on the level of the Purge. Most of you guys know about it already. And so they have Squid Games season 2. Mostly not spoiler alert. I'm just going to focus on one thing. That there's a transgender character, right? So the main character gets sucked back into a second round of, even though he has all this money, and he's trying to destroy the Squid Games. And he's got a team of people, but he gets sucked back in for whatever reason, and it's not important. And he goes there, and they're introducing the new cast of characters. Remember, all the people died but him in the first Squid Games. And so they introduce the characters, and there is a transgender character, right? And they point out that there's this transgender character. They talk about it. Now, in Korea and South Korea, this is very taboo, right? They're not, they don't have this isn't Europe, which is, more pushing this agenda. The stuff with the LGBTQ woke stuff, the Hollywood morality stuff. That's been around for a long time in the elite levels of people in the modeling industry and the Hollywood and in England and these places, where these wealthy people have this, the morality that's now being forced on people, globally, right? And the transgender stuff has a lot to do with it, right? We've seen this, whatever, the men playing with women's sports, all these types of things, right? And so they put this in movies like the feminist agenda. But anyways, they introduce this character, and it's contrived. It's not natural. Netflix said, okay, because this is a huge show for Netflix. Very popular. And so there's going to be season 2. And Netflix is sponsoring it. They're the producers. So they said to the South Korean director, you're going to have a transgender character, and this is how the storyline is going to go for this character, right? You can see it's completely manipulative. It's not anything to do with the story itself other than pushing this on the South Korean people and the people of the world that, get this stuff all the time, right? But we now know that, these TV shows were made in 2023, 22, years ago, like it's last year, whatever it was, right? And now that Trump has won, you see that morality is swinging back and people are aware of it. Like the people are not, this was one of the big points, the commercial that was played over and over again, that Kamala Harris was paying for prisoners gender reassignment surgery with taxpayer dollars, and that whole commercial that played really poorly for her. And everybody's aware of it. Like that American people have said enough. And so we'll see what Hollywood does with this. But we know, like, when there's a movement and they think they got a movement going on, they capitalize it and get manipulative about it, especially when Hollywood's behind it, when they're behind the social movement. And, for years it was about white Christians and, these things. Like it was very pro-white, very pro-man. This is the rebellion that's happened with the other demographics speaking up and, the liberal movement, where white men are now demonized, right? These things. So here's what it says about transgender people in South Korea face discrimination, prejudice, and barriers of social inclusion. Here are some of the recent developments. It talks about how they're pushing some of this agenda there now because South Korea is very dependent on America. Okay, South Korea, the Korean War, and South Korea, and North Korea, and the border between the two countries, and just all of it, right? And South Korea, there's a great movie called Castaway on the Moon. It's a guy who ends up being on an island in the middle of a river next to a city, and everyone's ignoring it. It's good. It's a really good movie. I don't want to talk about it too much because it's I would like to see it again at some point. But I don't know where it's streaming. But there's a part of it because I wanted to find out more about the movie and some of the things that were in it. And they speak English a little bit in the movie. And speaking English is a huge thing in South Korea. Of course, there's K-pop, and that rapper, whatever that guy's name was, don't care, don't tell me, don't need to know. That big Korean rapper. But there's this, movement to be very much like America. And it's a status symbol to speak English and have a strong grasp on the American culture. And so this whole Netflix show and the Netflix money is pushing this agenda, right? And so, there's all of that. And so the storyline of the transgender character, it's a tall guy who used to be in the military who's in the process of transitioning, right? And initially the character is introduced, and then they redo the first game, which is red light, green light. And, these people who move are shot, right? This is how they play these games where people are killed. And all these people are owed money, and they're like the dregs of society, right? All these people have, they're willing to play this game because they're in desperate circumstances. And there is a person, one of the contestants is shot in the leg, and they're running out of time. And the main character, the guy who won the game before, he's compassionate. He's always trying to save people. And he already knows everyone's fucking doomed, so whatever. But he's got a bigger agenda, which is to close down the games. But he throws that aside. It's how they paint a character to make it look good, right? This is manipulating a story. So the main character goes out to lift this guy up. And the guy's shot in the leg, so he's off balance. And it turns green light, so he picks the guy up, but it immediately turns to red light. There's only about 10 seconds left to get over the finish line, and they're about 10 feet away. And the transgender character sacrifices himself for, puts himself at risk by helping this guy, right? By getting on the other side of this wounded guy and making sure he doesn't move. Because if they move, they're all dead. Like the guy will be shot. And so the three of them walk across the line, and now the transgender character is shown as being heroic, right? And this is scripted as a way to promote this in a country that's struggling with this in Korea, South Korea, and also, this American agenda. But it's completely contrived because you can make someone look like a hero. You can make somebody look like a villain. Like they did it both ways in the movie, the TV show I just talked about in Disclaimer with the character who is a horrible person. Like all the characters in most of these TV shows are bad people. Like there's very few heroes anymore. There are protagonists, but they're not, you root for them, but they're deeply flawed. In Disclaimer, Kate Blanchett is a horrible person, a horrible mom, manipulative, self-centered, just all these things, not trustworthy. And then she becomes a victim at the end, and you're supposed to feel bad for judging her because of the information that was distorted, even though the person who made the movie purposefully took you in that direction and then tried to M. Night Shyamalan you at the end of the thing, right? Because that's how they construct narratives. And to manipulate your audience this way, especially with the social agenda. So the next big storyline is The second game is they have to get into groups of 5 people, and they all have to play a kids game, and their legs are tied together, and the transgender character becomes a leader and helps the other people who are struggling. He slaps one contestant who's emotional, who's crazy, who's like a religious fanatic because she's getting hysterical and she's not doing what she was supposed to do. And the transgender character is saying all these things, right, to, is being a leader, and then does a great job at the end to get them through, right? And so now is shown as a person who will sacrifice himself for, the people that are there, the other contestants, and also be a leader because they want this person to be shown in a positive light, and also is being ostracized by all the villains. Like there's good people in this group, and then there's the selfish people that are the bad people, who are being mean to the transgender character. But the good people are accepting and inquisitive and supportive, and there's a mother and a son, and the mother is wanting the transgender character to come over to dinner after they get out of there, and asking questions, and they ask questions about the transgender character when he had to do the task, asked everyone to turn around. He said, "Well, my body isn't finished. I haven't had all the surgery," and explains, the whole process. A sympathetic view of what this person went through, right? Because they're pushing this agenda. They're pushing, this narrative on the Korean people, and it's because Netflix is, liberal and a part of this Hollywood agenda, and they've been pushing all these things as well, and it doesn't, fit with the rest of the storyline. It's like an infomercial. It's like they're selling you an infomercial, right? That, they're pushing this kind of, they're trying to sympathize with this kind of character, where in the past they might have demonized a character like this or made fun of them, and, these kind of things, which would have been, possibly part of a storyline that made sense. And, it might be mean, it might be malicious, it might be bullying, but it was how people actually treat each other and treat these types of people, right? And it wouldn't be pushing an agenda, or it would be because it would be a little bit, if they're trying to bring sympathy to a character. But the important thing to remember with all these stories and, what happens in the news and everything else, most of it's made up. And like I was saying earlier, why are there no big stories around Christmas, right? Why are there no we'll never forget about that thing that happened, remember, on Christmas? These days, even though there's lots of things that, could or should happen on the winter solstice, and the equinoxes are big days. But the holidays themselves, they're not big news days. So they be buried because no one's watching the news, right? And they want the economic boom from Christmas and these other holidays. So, most of the news is, well, let's take a break from the, bad news and the horrible things that are happening globally, right? This is kind of the way it goes. All of a sudden nothing bad's going to happen because it's Christmas. And, there's going to be none of these events, but then we'll get back into it. All of a sudden there's no drones, or, there's no whatever's going on. Luigi Mangione, the story takes a break, whatever's going on. Because a lot of it's just made up and contrived and, forced and, is part of a show. But then the fictional movies and TV shows, those are completely scripted. And they're manipulating their audiences. They're pushing an agenda. Again, whether you believe in something or not, or you're sympathetic to something, you're sympathetic to women who have been abused, or you're sympathetic to transgender people or whatever it is, right? Or whatever you're feeling about these subjects, it's clear that they're pushing these agendas. Because it's in every one of these shows, right? Men are bad and stupid and abusive and all these things. They're no longer the heroes. They're weak. They're pathetic. This is the way they're being portrayed more and more in there. And women are great, but if it's, a woman of color, it's even better. And there's all these now LGBTQ characters that are in these shows where they wouldn't probably be in a realistic narrative in terms of the people that are they're in the story, right? They just insert these storylines in there. It's like the producers in Hollywood say, if you don't insert these stories, even though like they take a script and they just add a character that is, whatever was going on in 2023, but now with the swing back to conservatism, you'll see in 2 years, if there's content, if the world's still here, it'll shift, right? All these things that they're now pushing will disappear or whatever, more than likely, because it's just contrived and it's, manipulating your audience, right? You're not telling your audience the truth. And so for somebody who does stuff like I do, and I talk about this with truthers, when truthers put music in that's manipulative, because music has an effect on people, all these ways of manipulating people's emotions and these other things that they do, right? It's not cool, right? It's not good to do that. It's abusive. In the way that I was talking about at the beginning of this video, this stuff is all abusive because it's not, it's affecting people's internal worlds through manipulation and untrue storylines, right? Things that are pushed in a way that portraying people as victims, certain demographics as victims, and also as heroes, and they're the good people, and these other people are the bad people. It's all the stuff that these groups talked about how they were demonized before. When I grew up, white men, there's a horrible movie with John Wayne, and he's just killing Indians, which I didn't like because I identified with the Indians for whatever it was. Like in the Cowboys and Indians, I like the Indians. It was, I think, something to do with past life stuff and maybe my just being sort of a contrarian in terms of my personality. But there was this movie in which John Wayne, they've killed these Indians, these Native American people. And John Wayne says, he goes down and he starts shooting out their eyes. And, have the quote somewhere, like this whole thing. Let me find if I can read it here. Okay, so I had this video ready to go, but I watched the final episode of this, whatever it is. I guess there's probably another 6 episodes. They had 7 episodes they released. They must be splitting it in half like they did. They pull that bullshit with Karate Kid or whatever, the Cobra Kai show as well. And so in the 7th episode, they bum rushed the guards and they take some of the guns and they go and try to take over the central command of the Squid Games. And the transgender character, who is ex-military, trains and advises them on how to use their weapons. It is like a super soldier. Like, is the hero of the whole thing, and is is the probably the best soldier or the best person with the gun. And so really painting this character as a hero. Again, it's a country where they don't they're not big on this kind of thing, and they're pushing for this agenda through Netflix, and it's just right there for everyone to see. And so I just want to add that here, and then I'll I guess in whatever 3 or 4 months when they release the other part of it, we'll see what happens to all these characters, especially that one. All right, let me go to this last ending part here. Here, let me pull this picture up here. In the movie The Searcher, John Wayne's racist Indian-hating character Ethan Edwards finds a dead Comanche Indian, and he shoots out the Indian's eyes. Wayne explains to his companions that according to the Comanche's belief system, a Comanche without eyes must wander in the spirit world without peace or rest forever. So it's not bad enough that you're taking these people's land, right? The whole hatred towards Indians that was put out there. Like Indians were portrayed as the bad guys. And then clearly, any white person being honest would say, yeah, the white people came in. And not, because I don't identify with the people that did this. Your demographic doesn't make you good, bad, or whatever. There's good people, there's bad people, there's spiritual people, there's devil worshippers in every demographic, whatever it is. Whatever you so-called identify as, right? Whatever group that you're put into, it's what kind of person you are, even your family. Like there's great people in a family and horrible people in a family, right? Like there's all these different, elements of that thing, right? And so, the demographics you belong to don't define you as a person. There are some stereotypes, sure, there's things like that, right? There's differences in behaviors that are, based on ethnicity and your culture and your, maybe your race and these things, whatever. But, being a good person or a bad person is up to you, right? And so what happened was the white people wanted America because America was fucking awesome, right? America, the native peoples had treated America, they were very natural. And they had issues. They had wars with each other. They took slaves. They were far from great. Like in terms of, they had their own issues, right? No groups of people are just blissful, pure, and innocent. Like it's just, there's always shit. There's always horrible people in every demographic and every time period. There's just stuff like that. And it's just whether the horrible people are running it or not. Like that's the difference. Like oftentimes the horrible people are marginalized and, the system has a way of keeping them from gaining power. But once those horrible people gain power, you have what we have today. And the horrible people that were in Europe were very exploitative, were very, ambitious and evil. And they thought they had this thing called manifest destiny where they were God's chosen people. And whatever they did was God's will. And that God willed them to take America by force and kill all these native peoples. And they killed like 100 million of them, so it's pretty fucked, right? And took their land. And still somehow wanted to be the victims. And this was portrayed, in these stereotypes and Disney cartoons and the Indians that were, when I grew up, there's all these cowboy movies, especially like, in the 50s and 60s, John Wayne character. And Indians were just completely, demonized in a way that wasn't fair or accurate, right? And now they've switched this, where, these demographics are being supported and they're demonizing the white people, and white men particularly, right? But it's the same behavior and same attitude. It wasn't that you got the demographics wrong, right? It wasn't like, no, as white people have been bad the whole time. It's that, people are fucked up and they're good people, better people. We all struggle with this, right? And things are supposed to happen historically, and but that doesn't mean that you have to be a complete dick about it. Like Master Chargy, the third master of the system, was asked about what happened with the Native American people. He had remembered past lives of a Native American when he came to America. He was an Indian, an East Indian. He also was St. Paul in a past life, and somebody else, I don't know, Spartacus or some person, a slave in ancient Rome. And he had memories of being here in America as an Indian, a Native American. And he said that, this thing was supposed to happen, that white people were supposed to go around the world and bring the world together into this, whatever's happened now, where there's connectivity between the continents and between cultures and, plane travel, all these things. Like that was going to happen. It needed to happen. There was some stagnation and lack of spiritual development in some of these Aboriginal cultures. And there needed to be a blending of what was supposed to happen. But the abuse that happened wasn't part of it. Like that was choice, right? Like they didn't have to be dicks about it. Like they could have been inclusive in some way and not killed all the native peoples and moved them off their lands, which is what the British and these other European countries did. Because they were assholes, right? Then they didn't need to do the things that they did. But he also said about America, he said America could be great. You have cultures from all around the world, and you could take what's best from each culture. All the great things that each culture has to offer, because each culture has something, and each group of people, a demographic, has something beautiful to offer, right? But he said it's been the opposite. You've taken the worst, like the gang level, street thug, the worst superstitions, the worst elements of each culture, and then blend it together instead of taking what's best, which is, a problem with humanity. And you see this happening again with this manipulative movies and these things where they just, they don't say, hey, it's wrong to demonize all demographics in story form and label them as bad, whether it be men or women or gay people or any people on the LGBTQ, alphabet people or races or these things, to demonize whole groups of people. There's a place for everybody. And just, be honest about it. Like, speak truth. Especially at a time where truth is happening. Whether people like it or not, you can't stop the truth from happening. It's not just an internet issue. It's a spiritual movement. And, this is why people are just not accepting of this bullshit anymore. But anyways, let me wrap this one up here. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing for the apocalypse. And the ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.